Well, thank you for coming. You can all go now. So that's just the flavor of what I'm going to do for you next. And to do that, I need to go here. So, where does the name come from? Well, the men part was easy when I was a kid, because this is what Jan Wenner, who was editor of Rolling Stone, said with John Rasmussen in the introductory issue of Men's Journal. He said, "Men have always been oriented towards action and accomplishment, a perspective that life is or should be an adventure." And that's what I thought, we all thought when we were growing up, that real men were. Most real men, okay. And now we live in a world of analog functions. So you can pretty much define yourself. And that's, I guess, a good thing. But I'm interested from the men part, more from the stout part. And a lot of my books, most of my books, are an anthem to something. The Cartwheels quadrilogy is an anthem to heroism of different forms. And this is an anthem to transcendence, but it's also an anthem to, I think what I've discovered is an appreciation I've gained for a new type of literary hero. Okay, the old type of literary hero was the Homeric hero of deeds, Ulysses, and guys like Leonidas, the Spartan 300s that chased away the Persians. But then, and each of these heroes went on a hero's journey and had some kind of epiphany and returned home. And then, in Athens, when Athens got totally stomped by the Spartans, there was no heroes of deeds left in Athens. So Socrates came along, and he had to have another kind of hero, which was the hero of moral conviction. So that held sway for several centuries. And then towards the end of the 1700s and into the early 1800s, Lord Byron came along, and he was part and not part of society, but he brought in the notion of the romantic hero. Didn't always work, but that's the way that went. So does anybody know who this fellow was? There's no quiz at the end, in most of my lectures. So this was Quintus Horatius Flaccus, whose name was Horace. And I, for this book, lean on the Horatian hero of character. And character, according to Horace, comes from the tension between the stoic public duty that heroes perform during the day and the absolute Epicurean private lives that they enjoy when they're not being stoic public heroes or public servants. And the way he writes lyric poetry, but he writes it serious and serene, with lots of melancholy and satire and irony. And I've tried, I hope, to capture in the prose what he'd captured in his poetry. So Horace said, "Live as brave men and face adversity with stout hearts." He also seemed to have a penchant for other things, wine in particular. And of course, that's the one aspect that I have nothing in common with. In fact, the Michelin Man comes from his bibendum. So that was Horace's invention. And then Einstein said, "Try not to become a man of success, but rather try to become a man of value." So this is where the Stout Men kind of emerged from. There's kind of 5 chapters. The first one is about the Stout Men derivation. The second is the trip down the Majan River. The third, the Himalayas. The fourth, the Amazon. And the fifth, the Salish Sea. And I had a whole bunch of potential readings, and I decided to narrow it down. You're not going to get anything from Beyond the Salish Sea, because that's the climax of the book, so I'm not reading anything from that. But I will read you one excerpt from Stout Men of the Himalayas, and 2 excerpts from Stout Men of the Amazon. And if we have time, and everybody's still awake, then I'll read you an excerpt from the new book, Fire Beyond the Darkness. So, sit back, enjoy. A little preface. Almost made a fatal mistake there. Papa Smurf and one of the other guys ended up going to Kathmandu first to organize the logistics of this trip, and failed miserably because by the time Tic Tac and Cliffy got there in the final plane, they'd been up for 2 days, and they thought they were going to have a night's rest in a lovely guest house in Kathmandu, and they were greeted with the prospect of climbing into a very tiny Nissan van and traveling all the way across southern Nepal so that they could catch their flight to Jumla to begin the trek in western Nepal the next day. Now, Papa Smurf planned this trip with the best of intentions, but was unaware that at the time there was a ferment of Maoist insurrection in western Nepal, and there was gunfire everywhere. And when these guys met the army, they asked them what that was all about, and they said, well, they were hunting, but they weren't more specific than that. But in any event, so this is how this extract begins. When our eyes finally accepted the fact of the black microvan's arrival, simultaneous whistled expressions of wonder exhaled at its tiny dimensions. "You must be joking," said Cliffy. "It is not for joking," said Achut. That much was clear. 6 large, sweaty men, all their trekking expedition gear, and a driver wedged into an import-sized Japanese van and embarked on an overnight ordeal across precarious roads through the Himalayas. Gung had to tie some of his webbing to the rear seat to keep from falling backwards out of the tailgate that refused to stay closed and upright. The microvan's nano exhaust pipe pumped diesel fumes and carbon monoxide back into the interior until Gung duct-taped an empty tin can to extend the manifold out far enough. Given the absence of any semblance of tread, it was surprising how long it took to blow a tire. One had obviously waited until we reached that specific blind corner in the mountains, where that particular tea shop had been waiting to engage in a preordained cultural exchange. An old chaiwala in his rakish Dhaka topi served us cardamom tea with too much milk and sugar, while 2 local men sewed the tire tube with a patch and pasted it with adhesive. When that failed, they cut another tube lengthwise and glued it over the original. They inquired after our caste in Canada. "Vancouver Canucks," said Madam, and they nodded sympathetically. We headed west and vertical into the golden hour before sunset, along steep, stacked switchbacks among the peaks. Far below us, rapid rivers cascaded through rock canyons into the valley floor, the white of the rapids brighter in the dusk than the white of the rare stretches of sandy shoreline. In between was a debris line from the last monsoon, the sun's remaining light playing on rich green hillsides terraced in rice and vertigo, and the occasional tin rooftops of mud brick houses hanging precipitously over the river. Chickens and children roamed all over the gravel road, which had been hand-pounded out of the surrounding rocks. The youngest toddlers were unwashed and uninhibited. Older brothers and sisters bent forward with heavy loads of firewood. Nightfall brought fatigue and fumes and flatulence onto our crushed, contorted bodies. Sleep was fitful, interrupted by the blaring, illuminated terror of oncoming trucks passing each other on razor-sharp cliff edges. Through countless shanty towns, guarded crossings, and rope barricades, we eventually had to stop to refuel. An empty moonlit field served as a comfort station, built more for speed in our determination to avoid snakes, or yeti, or unsympathetic landowners. On through the twilight gloom we careened, falling in elevation and out of consciousness, everything but the temperature and humidity about to fall farther. Just as they rose to their muggy microvan maximum, our driver switched off the engine. It was 4 a.m. at the Hotel Batika. "Get some sleep," grumbled Papa. "Our flight to Jumla leaves at 6:30. But Papa and Gung and Polly and Madam and Tic Tac and Cliffy were going to fall asleep in a Hindu place, where many roads exist by which men can pursue their quest for truth, where none has universal validity, and where reason has no scope for development. If you want to make the gods laugh, tell them about your plans. 4 a.m. didn't only come early, it came sore in every way. Some of us tried to find refuge in silent prayer. Achute's brother had arranged for an even smaller weight microvan than Achute had provided to take us on the very bad road to Surquette. The chassis was so low that its running boards and fenders made frequent contact with the ground, as if to reassure the driver that he was not about to fly off into surrounding hills. No such reassurance greeted us, however, on our bruised arrival at what seemed to be an airstrip 4 hours later. It is true that there were aircraft of fable on the field. It is true that Nikon Air had been in the business of flying for almost 6 years as Nepal's first private airline. It is true that we arrived a year after one of their pilots steered his Avro 748 back onto the runway after his hydraulic system failed, and into another engineless parked Nepal Airways Avro 748. And a year before another Nikon Air Avro 748 collided with a communications tower, killing all 10 passengers and 5 crew members. It is true that 5 years after we arrived in Surquette, that Nikon Air would suspend all flights because of money it owed to private commercial banks, to the Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal for landing, and ground charges to the Nepal Oil Corporation for fuel, and to Raytheon for leasing their aircraft. But it is not true that Nikon Air was necessarily expecting us. The 2 Cessna 208 caravans on the strip were being bulk loaded with pallets of Indian cigarettes and whiskey. And it first appeared that no one with mirrored sunglasses was at all interested in flying 6 big hairy Courays